where we left off a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to break down the superlatives of the best high major conferences in the country, and then we're going to do a best of the rest. We're going to talk the best team in each conference. We're going to talk about the best player. We're going to talk about the best NBA prospect, and then we are going to preview 2 commitments coming up tomorrow on the 24/7 Sports channel. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome in my partner in crime on this preview segment, Isaac Trotter.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We get to talk about 2 of the best conferences in college basketball today. That's kind of fun.
That's what we're doing. So we're doing Big 12 and SEC. If you missed it last week, we went ACC, Big 10, and Big East. You can go check that out on the 24/7 Sports channel. But like I said, the plan, we're not talking about every team. We're just talking about the best team, the best player, the best NBA prospect. We're going to come back and do more in-depth previews later on this month. But we're working on the periphery right now. So I will go to you, Isaac. Let's start in the Big 12. And tell me who you think, because you got a little bit of a surprise answer here. You didn't go with who I thought you were going to go with. But why don't you have Kansas as the best team in the Big 12?
I think it really goes back to retention for me. College basketball is filled with so many new teams, and there's 67 new coaches and 67 new rosters. And I like Houston, and I love what they've done being able to be different. Everyone else is adding a bunch of guys. They've only had to add one transfer in the portal. And the ability to have like the same scheme defensively with a lot of those same faces, I think makes this group really, really special. Like I think Houston is going to be hellacious defensively on that end. Like, what is Houston known for? It's like everyone's like kind of plays a lot of passive defense. Houston is the most aggressive defense in college basketball, them or Iowa State. And they just have so many junkyard dogs, 6'7", 6'8" forwards who have super long wingspans who just get after you. And Jawan Roberts, JoJo Tugler, Javier Francis, like this group is going to be phenomenal defensively up front. And I'm bullish on these guards. Emmanuel Sharp and LJ Cryer are both back, but the addition of Milos Uzan, he doesn't have a lot of positional overlap with this group. He is a really, really skilled playmaker, and he played under Porter Moser, who is known for his defensive style. I think he's going to pick up Houston's defensive concepts really quickly and be an asset on that end. So it's easy to make the case for Kansas. Baylor has a great case. Arizona has a great case. But those teams have a lot of new pieces to work in. Give me the group in Houston that has a lot of these same faces, and they're super, super old.
That's true. There's only one problem with that argument. There's no Jamal Shed. I don't know that there was any play. And you know what? Kelvin Sampson, listen, he's going to get it done. I have no arguments with what you just said, but Jamal Shed, I think, was as important a college basketball player as there was last year, and I know about all those big guys. So, all right, somebody's got to make the case for Kansas. Allow it to be me. I've said on this show in the past, I think Kansas is out for blood this year. You made a very good point about retention. Well, Kansas returns 3 starters, and arguably one of the best players in the conference, and Hunter Dickinson. I'm not going to talk too much about him because you're going to talk about him shortly. DeJuan Harris, a pure point guard who knows how to distribute the ball, get it where it needs to go. KJ Adams, an ultra warrior and just kind of the spark plug of this team. Those guys are all back. You add AJ Storr, who we are going to talk about as one of the best prospects in this league. You got Zeke Mayo. This guy put up 19, 6, and 5. How about these shooting splits last year? 47% from the floor, 39% from 3, 83% from the free throw line at South Dakota State. They got Rylan Griffin, another 6'6" wing who can shoot it. The only concern I have is backcourt depth, and that's after the injury to Elmarco Jackson. We saw depth be a problem for this Jayhawk team last year. I thought their first 5 was as good as anybody. Remember, they beat UConn on their home floor before the Huskies went on to win their second consecutive national championship. The plan, the hope is that Shaquille Moore will help offset that loss. But that to me is going to be potentially an Achilles heel, the backcourt depth of this team. But I just think Kansas, not only in the Big 12, if I had to pick a preseason favorite right now, I think I'd go with the Jayhawks.
And then you also have arguably the best X's and O's coach in college basketball right now, or other than Dan Hurley, in Bill Self. So not a bad pick.
Bill Self, he's pretty good at his job, everybody. All right, best player. We're gonna talk about a couple of guys from Kansas, so I kept it a little short. Tell me why Hunter Dickinson is your best player in this conference.
I think his decision making is just elite. You know, we already know how good he is in the paint and as a post-up scorer, but he's the second best passer on this roster behind DeJuan Harris. And that ability to whip the ball all over the floor, he commands double teams, he can make passes cross court to shooters. All of that stuff is so important. There's some limitations defensively, and I think Hunter Dickinson would tell you that. But I do think that the additions that we've all talked about in this first segment about Kansas really maximize what Dickinson does well. Like the ability to have Rylan Griffin on the floor is another shot maker to spread the floor. You have Shaq Moore, who can attack long closeouts and potentially be a shot maker. We've seen what Zeke Mayo can do, especially as a catch and shoot guy, which he's going to get more of those opportunities. All of this just makes it seem like Dickinson's going to be the fulcrum of this offense as a decision maker on 4-on-3s and post-ups. We know Kansas loves to get the ball to their big men. And the other factor of this too is last year was not easy for him. It's a first year in the program. It's just new and different. And there's a lot of expectations. There were 9 All-Americans last year that were year 2 transfers. Dickinson is going to be a phenomenal bet to potentially follow that exact same game plan next year as a year 2 transfer at Kansas, has a chance to be potentially a player of the year candidate and a first team All-American.
I agree with you. I think Dickinson is the best college basketball player in the conference, not necessarily the best NBA prospect. But I want to pull the thread of something you said. They're talking about some of their new guys. AJ Storr, this is his 3rd school in 3 years. St. John's as a freshman really came on strong late in the year. And then Wisconsin last year had a total green light. So 17 points per game, 43% shooting, only 32% from the 3-point line. Now, this is where it's interesting. A year earlier at St. John's, when he had to kind of pick his spots a little bit more, he was close up near 40% from the 3-point line. So this year, when he doesn't have to do so much on the offensive end, and quite frankly, where he's going to have to pick his spots a little bit more selectively because of all of the talent around him, because of the culture of sharing the ball with guys like Harris running the show, with Dickinson in the middle who can facilitate as well. I mean, you're not going to take bad shots, go back to the huddle, and not hear about it at Kansas next year. So he's going to have to acclimate to that. And I think his physical upside with that power, that 6'7" frame, I think it's possible. You see him play some small ball 4 when KJ Adams goes out of the lineup. I think Storr is a very intriguing guy, and I know we're going to turn our attention to NBA prospects in a moment, but I thought AJ Storr was an NBA prospect last year, and I expect his stock could continue to rise this year if those shooting numbers come back around with some higher percentage looks. But what's your take on that?
No, I'm right there with you. And here's the other thing, too. Kansas got bogged down a lot last year. There was not a lot of easy stuff for them in transition. They led the country in assist rate. What does that tell me? Well, it means you had to dial up a bunch in half-court settings. Storr's ability to get out in transition and get easy buckets is going to be a huge, huge part of this. Because if he runs the floor, he can be the most dynamic scorer in college basketball. And we've seen it the last few years. Terrence Shannon Jr., Dalton Knecht, Devin Carter, all those guys just put up huge numbers in transition. That's the path, I think, for Kansas to reach back to that elite ceiling offensively. This was not a good offense last year. Part of it was a transition offense that went awry, and I think Storr is a big part of the solution there.
Yeah, and if he doesn't acclimate, if he doesn't take good shots, if he doesn't run the floor, it's like, hey, Rylan Griffin, Zeke Mayo, we got other guys, man. You got to play our way or you're not going to play at all because, Bill Self, he's not going to compromise. All right, we're going to talk best NBA prospect in the conference. You and I both had the same guy. I'm going to let you start with VJ Edgecombe first, and then I will follow up with kind of my thoughts on what I think the consensus is at this point and where people may be missing out who haven't watched him quite as closely over the course of the last 2 years. But give me your rationale for why VJ is the best NBA prospect in the conference.
Well, I think he's a dog. Like, he's just a lean, mean scoring machine and just wants to do it in a bunch of different ways. I love the rim pressure that he constantly puts on opposing teams. And that's where I think the fit with this Baylor roster is really set up to maximize him. When Baylor plays Jalen Celestine at the 4 and Norchad Omier at the 5, the paint's going to be wide open. Both those guys can really shoot it from downtown. You have to respect them. And that's just going to open more and more driving lanes for Edgecombe to get to the rim. And I think defensively, too, there's a lot there to like about his game. And obviously, he's a 5-star and one of the best prospects in this class. But everything you hear about him, he just feels like he checks off a ton of boxes. And then the situation going into it with this roster construction and what Baylor's done in the past with freshmen like Jacoby Walter, Yves Missi, Keontae George, Jeremy Sohan, just feels like there's a real path here for him to just be him and do what he does and do what Baylor does with 5-star freshmen and have a really, really impactful year. And I kind of wonder if he's a sneaky All-American candidate if it all comes together.
All right. Well, Here's what I would say. I think VJ's game is so loud that explosive athleticism in transition. When you put him in a setting like the Hoop Summit or the McDonald's All-American game, he's going to be one of the first guys who pop to the NBA executive. Because here's what happens. Like, the higher level execs aren't necessarily the ones who go and do the legwork earlier on in the high school career. So a lot of them are getting their kind of their first taste of them at those postseason events like last spring when their high school career is over. And VJ Edgecombe, scouts loved him. Executives loved him. The big decision makers loved him, many of whom were just seeing him for the first time. I think the thing that's going to be really important for VJ is to play within himself and yet continue to develop those guard skills. In addition to being an elite athlete, he's also super competitive. I think he's going to be a very good defender. And everything you said about that pathway from Baylor to the NBA is spot on. And I also think, quite frankly, it was a big part of why he chose to go there. So I think he's clearly on a one and done path. But we may need to temper expectations a little bit. Like, listen, if he comes out and scores eight points, 7 points in the first couple of games of the season, people are going to freak out and they're going to say, but this is a guy, especially if you watch him last 2 years as a junior at Long Island Lutheran, he led what was then the NIBC in scoring. Last year, his scoring numbers dipped by more than 5. I think it was closer to 7 or 8 points per game because he's not somebody who goes out and forces his individual offense. So it's going to be about the long-term upside, being patient with his skill set, and also realizing that while the situation is ideal for him, he's not someone who is going to force feed those numbers right away. And so I think people need to be careful about jumping to any conclusions if he's not stuffing the stat sheet right away in November. That's my take on VJ. But as I said, I totally agree he's the best NBA prospect in the conference.
Well, and then there's also the fact that, there's Jeremy Roaches here who will command a high usage rate. Omir's here that will command a high usage rate. Like, he's not going to have a 27% usage rate next year, I wouldn't assume. So he has to be efficient on those limited touches, although the quality of look that you get at Baylor is super, super high under Scott Drew.
All right, let's turn our attention to the SEC. Now, remember, one of the reasons why we're doing this exercise is because, quite frankly, the conferences have changed. Like the schools, we don't necessarily see the same old faces. There's some of them. Got Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, LSU, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Missouri, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Vanderbilt. So the new look SEC. Isaac, when you take a look at those teams in the 2024-25 SEC, who is your favorite to win this year?
I'll take the team that finished top on KenPom last year and gets all their guys back in Auburn. I think this is a group that is arguably the best rim defense in the sport now that Donovan Clingan has left UConn. They finished just a hair behind UConn in rim defense last year. Team shot just 48% at the rim against Auburn, which is just nuts. And they're going to do a lot of those same things with Janai Broome and Dylan Cardwell back. And I'm really bullish on these year 2 transfer jumps from Denver Jones and Chad Baker-Mazara. Both of those two guys got a lot of experience in the starting lineup last year, and I think they're going to be a whole lot better as they take another step forward. JP Pegues out of Furman is awesome, but Georgia Tech transfer Miles Kelly, I think, has a chance to be one of the better value gets out of the portal. I think a lot of people looked at him and they're like, well, a high volume shooter, but the percentages just weren't great. He had to bail Georgia Tech out of a lot of possessions last year. I think the quality of shot that he gets at Auburn is going to be completely different. And Bruce Pearl's talked about it too. He's one of the best shooters that they've had in their program. So you give me a Janai Broome, who's an SEC Player of the Year candidate. You give me this stable of guards. You give me the defense that I know that they're going to play at the rim and their home court advantage. I think Auburn has a chance to be the best team in the league. All
right. Now let me ask you this. Who do you think is the deepest team in college basketball next year? I'll give you a hint because it's the team I'm picking. Best team in the SEC. I got to go with Alabama. I mean, how Nate Oates built this level of depth. I'm looking at this roster, and I just don't see who doesn't play. I mean, there's legitimately 12 or 13 guys on this roster who absolutely have to play. I mean, you're talking about either legitimate All-American candidates or legitimate NBA draft candidates at virtually every position on the floor. You've talked about Chris Youngblood and how you love him coming in as a grad transfer. I'm going to talk about Mark Sears a little bit in a little bit here because I think he's going to be one of the best guards in college basketball again this year. Then you add Cliff Amorie in the middle, like just a defensive monster. Talk about protecting the rim. Grant Nelson, the skilled big. You've got Jaron Stevenson, who I've talked about as a potential breakout guy. We're not even mentioning Mohamed Diabate yet, who's kind of like the defensive extraordinaire of this group. Darion Reed, you're hearing tremendous things about how he's acclimating so far as a freshman. Houston Mallett's another one. Like, not even talking about Naz Cunningham and Aiden Sherrill. Like, this is LeBaron Filan. Like, this is ridiculous. There's just too many guys. Like, call the inter-squad scrimmage the conference championship game. They are absolutely loaded. And here's the thing. We know two things about what Nate Oates is going to do. It's going to be an analytically driven approach, and it's going to be a creative offensive system that highlights all of these weapons. And when you have so many guys, it gives the coach the authority, if you will, or the leverage is the better word, to say, hey, you guys go battle it out. May the best man win, and that's who's going to get on the floor. I just think Alabama is absolutely loaded. This is the most talent Nate Oates has ever had, 1 through 13 on his roster.
And if he can weaponize this depth, I think that's the way to really elevate into a national title contender, because you can play big, you can play small. Like, you didn't even mention Aiden Holloway, who we still have very high hopes for.
That was an oversight on my part. Yeah.
I mean, that just shows you how loaded they are and kind of where they're at. But again, I'm all about like how they weaponize this. And what's your prediction of a starting lineup? For me, it's Sears with Youngblood, Darian Reed, Grant Nelson, and Cliff Amori. Like, there's no doubt in my mind, if that's a starting lineup, that group is way better than 111th defensively, what they were last year. Like, that might be a top 15 to 20 defense.
So I think one of the subplots of Alabama this year is going to be the way that they choose to play. So I think initially you're going to see both of those big guys start together. Cliff and Grant are going to start the 4 and 5. I'm very curious to see if they stick with that, because we know how much Nate values shooting, and getting Jaron Stevenson at the lineup at the 4, I think is something that may inevitably happen over the course of the season. I mean, there's enough minutes there for everybody, or at least for those 3 guys. But that is going to be really interesting to me. I'm very interested to see how Holloway, like, is he the backup point guard, or is Filan the backup point guard? I've heard a lot of good things about Filan, as I have about Darion Reed. Like, the intel out of Alabama in terms of what those 2 guys are doing so far has been very, very strong. And we know how you feel about Youngblood. So, like, we know Sears is going to start. We know Cliff is going to start. I think Darion's going to start. I think you have to start Grant, and then it's just Aiden or Youngblood, and I think probably it's Youngblood right off the bat. So that's my answer to your question. But I think that could really evolve, and it wouldn't surprise me if Stevenson is finishing games early on, and especially down the stretch of the season.
And that's their best NBA draft prospect that they're bringing off the bench. Like, yeah, they're loaded. They're loaded. Like that. Like I said, like, picking Auburn over Alabama is not a shot at Alabama. It's more of a, like, these 2 teams are tier 1 national title contenders and right
Agreed.
next to each other.
Agreed. They're both national championship contenders. All right, we're going to keep talking about these teams now, because we're going to talk about the best player in the conference. You have continued to go with someone from Auburn. I've continued to go with someone from Alabama. Talk to me about your pick.
Yeah, for me, it's Chani Broome, because I don't know what he does wrong. He really impacts the game on every single level. Elite rim protection, elite rim pressure. He can pass it. He now added a jumper. Like, he's an NBA player who's playing in college, and now he enters like year 5 in college. Like, we've seen big men who stay in college longer. Like, they just smash. Like, Auburn had a +20 net rating with him on the floor. Like, I think Broome could potentially challenge Zach Edey for having like a +25, +30 net rating when he's on the floor next year, especially when you factor in just all the shooting that Auburn has added in the portal and in their roster construction. So his ability just to beat you in post-ups, he can beat you from the mid-post, he can face up, spin, dribble, get into the middle of the paint for little floaters, gets to the free throw line at will. Like, he just impacts the game on such a high level, especially defensively. Like, he's arguably one of the best defenders in college basketball too, and he's also awesome offensively. So just his 2-way impact is pretty much the reason why I have him as the SEC Player of the Year. But you can't go wrong with Sears either. Yeah,
I think Mark Sears is going to be the best player in the conference. I mean, I think he's college basketball's Jalen Brunson. Quite frankly, that's not to say he's going to be Jalen Brunson in the NBA, but he may be undersized, but he is tough. He is skilled. And what really stands out to me is, for all the volume he played with last year, for all the tough shots he had to take, this guy shot over 51% from the floor and 44% from the 3-point line. I mean, those are just ridiculous numbers for someone who had to take tough shots, because he buys into Oates' system. He puts pressure on the rim. He shoots threes. He's really expanded that part of his game in recent years. I think what's going to be interesting this year is, given the amount of weapons that are around him, we may have to see him evolve into more of a distributor and less of a shot maker. So that's going to be an interesting transition, and one that could ultimately pave a translatable role to his professional aspirations. But to me, he's the best player in the league. And I also think this year in college basketball, listen, it's been a game of giants for the last 2 years with Zach Edey and Donovan Clingan, and I think we're going to get back to a little bit more of a guards game this year. And if you need a guard in college basketball, Mark Sears would be one of the first guys I want on my squad, if not number one. But one of the things we've seen in recent years, we talk about those big guys, is that the best college players are not always the best NBA prospects. So I want to ask you now, who is your best NBA prospect in the SEC?
For me, it's Colin Murray-Boyles out of South Carolina. Again, just like the defensive versatility, his ability to pass, dribble, and maybe shoot. I think that's like the last little question there. But just his smarts defensively, how much ground he covers, his ability to make plays as a distributor, like it's all there for him. And I have real questions about like what South Carolina is offensively this year. Last year, they found some success with BJ Mack as a stretch five and Murray-Boyles kind of inverting the floor from the four with his like mid-post back downs and using that to spray over the floor. This year, it's a little bit different because they added Nick Pringle out of Alabama, who isn't a floor stretcher. He's more of a guy who wants to sit in the dunker spot and just go tear the rim off. So I think that's a bet on Murray-Boyles finding his jumper. And you're going to look at the roster and be like 6'7", 230 last year. He's actually gotten a little bit taller this offseason. That's some of the noise out of South Carolina. And just the wingspan that he has, like it's the perfect type of archetype of what you're looking for. Now, granted, he needs to shoot it a little bit better, but everything else he does just impacts winning on such a high level. And he's insanely smart. Like his basketball IQ is through the roof, and that pops off on the tape like left and right.
I can't disagree with you. The one thing I will add is I think he surprised some people last year. He's in the top of the scouting report from day one this year. He had, he went out to the NBA Academy, NBA Skills Academy in August, and he got rave reviews as one of the best college players there. He's being talked about as a potential lottery pick. So I totally agree with you. He's one of the top NBA prospects to know in the conference, but it's a lot different when everybody else is gaming for you and they're building their defense around that to take that next step. So that's going to be an interesting, he's certainly going to be someone that's going to be very interesting to watch all year. Listen, I want to talk a little bit about Trey Johnson because this is someone who is a former number one ranked prospect in the high school class, has clear one and done aspirations. He's kind of a throwback style shooting guard and a tough shot maker, but he's got projectable size. He's got projectable length. We saw his physical tools really go to the next level last year as a senior in high school. And this is someone who is wired to score. So he's going to come in to Texas. He's a Texas native, and Rodney Terry is going to have to let him go a little bit, but there has to be a little bit of a common ground in terms of Trey finding an efficient way to attack within the flow of the offense, Texas letting him go, but also getting him some easy baskets, because the scouting report on Trey to date is like when he gets hot, he can burn you, but he's going to settle for tough shots no matter what. I think he's got to find a little bit of a rhythm, playing with better players at Texas, obviously. What can Rodney Terry do to get him easy baskets and to make the game a little bit easier for him? That's all going to be part of it. But again, NBA level scorer with positional size, positional length, all of that stuff translates. But just like with VJ Edgecombe, this is not an easy thing to go into college with already this one and done path kind of already in front of you, regardless of what happens during the course of the year and everybody gunning for you. So I think this is going to be, Trey's going to be a really interesting one to watch this season.
I'm a little concerned about his rim rate last year. It was really, really low at the high school ranks. And right. So Texas, every single team that Rodney Terry has coached since 2020 has had a shockingly low rim and three rate. Like they just don't take shots at the rim and a lot of threes compared to their counterparts. And then I look at this roster, it's like, okay, Jordan Pope doesn't get to the rim. Arthur Kaluma is a little bit iffy on that. Tremone Mark loves to settle into, mid-range jumpers. And now we have Trey. It's like, there's some questions here. Like the fit on this roster is going to be really weird because there's a lot of ISO monsters. And I don't know if your turn, my turn works in the half court, especially against some of these well-schooled defenses in the Big 12. And I think this is an opportunity for Trey to show he's more than just an ISO scorer. And he's going to have to be something different than what Texas has on this roster.
Well, and that's why I say they've got to do things to simplify the game for him. You've got to build in, get some back cuts, get him some rip throughs so he can get to the free throw line. But if you're coaching him this year, you've got to help him get easy baskets, because to your point, he is instinctively an isolation type player and a little bit of a ball stopper, and he's playing with other guys like that. So the coaching staff has got to, and I'm sure they do, they've got to recognize that, hey, this is the challenge of the pieces we've put together. What can we do to kind of make this a little bit more of an easier transition and help these guys get some easier baskets? All right, Isaac, we have now broken down the top team, top player, top NBA prospect in the 5 major conferences in college basketball next year, because there's only 5. Right now, I want to do this quickly, get through the best of the rest, and talk about everybody outside of those 5. So no rebuttals here. We're just going to go, who is your best team outside of what I am deeming the Power 5 of college basketball?
This one's easy for me. There's no one that's even really in the discussion. It's Gonzaga. They're a tier 1 national title contender for me, just with what they've been able to do in the portal and the ability to keep their portal stars. They'll get Ryan Nembhard back. They get Graham Ike back. They have Nolan Hickman. And then they go into the portal. They get Michael Ajayi, and they're able to also add a Khalif Battle out of Arkansas. So I love the mix that they have. I love the young bigs that they're able to keep in the program, whether that's with Ben Gregg. Braden Huff showed a ton of really promising signs last year. And then again, this is another bet on the ecosystem here. Gonzaga, 14 of the last 16 years, they've rated in the 90th percentile or higher in pick and roll offense. Like, this is one of the best pick and roll offenses in college basketball, period. And there's no reason for this to stop heading into next year. I think they can win the national title, and I think that they have a chance to have a really, really special year because their ability to retain top talent and keep some of these guys out of the portal that they've done a really good job of also finding on the recruiting trail.
All right, you know what? I'm going to ask you, because your best players from Gonzaga too. I'm just going to ask you, what is it about Ryan Nembhard that you think like differentiates himself from anybody else not in the Power 5?
I love the playmaking and the vision that he has. Like, just his feel for the game is just off the charts, especially towards the end of last year. He really flipped a switch and was playing point guard, like as good as maybe anybody in college basketball. Like, he has everything in his bag. I think he has to simplify some of his shot diet just a little bit more, eliminate some of those tough off the dribble jumpers. But the feel for the game, his ability to get 2 feet in the paint without needing a screen, the ability to draw 2 defenders and create space for his teammates, the pick and pop, the pick and roll, like he throws lobs like dimes in transition. He's always looking ahead in transition as well for those push ahead passes. Maybe he doesn't get the assist on it, but Gonzaga gets a great shot at the rim. Like, he is one of the most impactful point guards in the sport. And like you said earlier, basketball has been dominated by bigs lately, but college basketball still and will forever be a guards game, and Gonzaga has one of the best of them in Ryan Nembhard.
All right, you know which guard I am expecting to have a breakout season this year? And that's Don Thomas at UNLV, the local guy who reclassified up to join the hometown school last year, a year earlier than expected. And listen, I get it. He's a little undersized, but I've talked about this before. It is really hard to reclassify up, skip a year of high school, go in and make an immediate impact in college basketball, especially if you are a guard. And that is exactly what this guy did last year. Listen, he's a playmaker. He's got skill. He's got feel. He's got IQ. He's got toughness. But above all that, he's got an it factor that resonates, and it resonates in his hometown, and just cleared today after a little bit of an injury. But I expect him to put up significant numbers last year. Just like a couple weeks ago, I said, I think the game's going to be easier for Elliot Cadeau. I think the game's going to be a lot easier for Thomas. And I think he's going to be very possibly the best player, one of the best players outside those Power 5 programs. Isaac, real quick, best NBA prospect. And this is listen, there's no Chet Holmgren on this list. So give me your 20 to 30 second version of an intriguing NBA prospect, not in one of the 5 clear high major conferences.
Let me go to the Ivy League, and Xavier Lee out of Princeton. His ability in pick and rolls is phenomenal. 92nd percentile in pick and roll efficiency last year, according to Synergy. And then he went to the combine and balled. Like, he was awesome out there. He looked like totally at ease at the combine running the show. He's a little slight. He's a little undersized at like 165, 170 pounds, and he shot 64% on the rim at super, super high volume. So Princeton's offense, their ability to use isolation in great ways really showcases Lee's knack for just getting into the paint without needing a screen. And that's what the NBA really, really features and wants. So high IQ, can shoot it, can get into the paint, can make plays for others. He is a really, really good player. Like, I don't know if I would project him to go in the first round right now, but he's an early second round pick contender and has a chance to play his way into the first round with a big junior season.
I think that Adama Ball is a really intriguing mid-major NBA prospect. This is someone I talked about last season. 6'7" at Santa Clara, started his career at Arizona and really didn't play much. Only averaged 2.5 points per game as a sophomore, but joined a Santa Clara program that was just getting used to life without pods, and he kind of stepped right into that role. Again, kind of this jumbo creator at 6'7", who could could play with the ball in his hands without it. About 14.5 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists last year. But the thing for me that was really noticeable was just how up and down he was. Now, when he started to get on that NBA radar mid-season, I think I don't know if it was pressure or what, but from that point on, he was really, really streaky. I mean, you could turn Santa Clara on TV and watch him drop 20. You could turn him on and watch him drop 4 or 6. I mean, so he's got to get more consistent. He's got to adapt to, as we were saying, the pressure of being atop the scouting report on any given night. But this guy has positional size and versatility as a secondary playmaker that could really translate. And I think he is an intriguing prospect that NBA scouts are going to be following all year long. All right, with that, we are done with our conference previews. As always, not our conference previews, our conference superlatives. Conference previews still to come. As always, thank you to Isaac for being here. You can find all of his work on 247sports.com, along with wall-to-wall team coverage, recruiting rankings, and transfer portal updates. Now, if you are watching us here, this is the 24/7 Sports channel. You are going to want to keep it locked on this channel for the next 24 hours because we have got some significant commitments coming up tomorrow on Thursday. It's a doubleheader, if you will, and the main event is Jasper Johnson, the 5-star guard who is going to be choosing between 3 finalists. We are talking about one of the most silky smooth scorers in the entire country. As I said, 5-star player, currently ranked 12th overall in the national class, 6'4", 175 pounds. He's got 5 finalists, but I'll tell you what, folks, there's really only 3 in the mix there. I think it's going to be a choice between Alabama, Kentucky, and North Carolina, or at least that is the perception. You will find out tomorrow at about 2:15 Eastern time right here on the 24/7 Sports channel. But before that, at 1:30, you are going to see Silas Barksdale from Virginia and the Boo Williams EYBL program. He's going to announce his commitment live on the 24/7 Sports channel. He's going to be choosing between Butler, Miami, and VCU. Barksdale is one of the truly elite rebounders in the national class. He's got a big body, a soft touch. He's a little bit of a mismatch playmaker in the front court. He's got floaters. He's got all kinds of stuff. Really intriguing prospect, too. I want this to be a spoiler alert. Could be making a jump in the upcoming rankings, which, by the way, you're going to see on next week's show. So keep it locked right here on the 24/7 Sports channel. And, of course, see us on 247sports.com. It is going to be a very busy week in the basketball world. Even though it's football season, you can find all of it, hoops and basketball, 247sports.com and the 24/7 Sports channel.